Welcome to Friends with Fertility, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of fertility, reproductive health, and all the emotional journeys that are in between. I'm your host, Elizabeth King, a fertility expert dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, support, and inspiration you need on your path to parenthood. Whether you're just starting out, exploring your options, or looking for solidarity and advice, we are here for you. Let's embark on this journey together and turn uncertainty into empowerment and make friends with fertility. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to Friends with Fertility. Today we are speaking with Ellen Weir Casey. Welcome.
Hello.
She is the mother of Colorado's first test tube baby. Her debut memoir, Unstoppable: Forging the Path to Motherhood in the Early Days of IVF, is the first-person account of a patient's experience in the dawning days of assisted reproductive technology. Casey is a passionate advocate for the family-building technology of IVF and an active supporter of women's unrestricted access to healthcare. I'm so excited to talk to you about all of this because what an extraordinary step to take when you did this. And what year was this, may I ask?
I got pregnant in 1982.
And so I'm friends with Elizabeth Carr, who is known for being the IVF baby number one in the United States. Were you aware of that during your going through it? Like, how did that conversation start? Did they say there's one other person that's gone through this, a few other people? How did that come up?
There was a complete dearth of information about IVF. It was called test tube baby at the time.
Right, right.
And no, I had been going through infertility treatment for 4 years, and it was
Did you
such a
have a
new
diagnosis?
I had a diagnosis of having blocked fallopian tubes. Originally, I was given an IUD, an experimental IUD, by a medical doctor who should never have given it to a 24-year-old unmarried young woman. It caused a terrible infection that caused extreme scarring throughout my entire peritoneal cavity. And therefore, I needed help. I had to sit in the library basement of the public library in Colorado Springs, going through medical journals on microfiche, which probably not
Wow.
none of your
Yes.
listeners even know what that is. I went through medical journals looking in the index, trying to find the word fallopian tubes because mine were blocked. And I was able that way to find doctors who were trying experimental treatments on fallopian tubes. That's how my journey began. I started off flying to Vancouver, Canada, and having microsurgery, which no one had ever heard of in 1979.
And were you nervous about that when no one had heard of that and you're thinking, I'm going to go do this because this is my way to have a baby? Or were you like, no, I'm good. Let's get this done?
Yeah, I was not nervous one bit. I
Good.
met Dr. Victor Gomel. He was charming, intelligent, lovely. He's the first person who said to me, "This is not your fault that you aren't
Mm,
able to get pregnant," which of course we know is a common thread through women feeling the guilt that it's their fault. And I
right.
felt that guilt because I'd had the IUD. Anyway, I did not have any concerns whatsoever. He did surgery and he was only able to open one fallopian tube in 5 hours. I
Wow.
knew it would work, which it did, and I immediately became pregnant. But we now know that any kind of surgery on fallopian tubes leaves the possibility that scar tissue will stop the route of a fertilized egg through the fallopian tube, which is what happened to me. And I had an ectopic pregnancy,
Oh,
which
no.
nearly
Sorry.
killed me. It ruptured
Mm,
because in 1979, they couldn't diagnose ectopic pregnancy. Ultrasound wasn't sophisticated enough, blood
right.
tests didn't exist. So
And
that's
that must have
that.
been so scary not to even know what that pain was coming from, what was going on.
Oh, I
I
knew what
can't
it was.
imagine.
I had
You
again, as
did.
soon as I was pregnant, I again began reading everything I could find in
Mm,
medical journals about what could happen with surgery on
okay.
fallopian tubes. And when I had the pain, my husband and I were driving, and I said, "Take me right to the hospital. I'm having an ectopic pregnancy.
Oh,
And if I pass out, keep going because I will die." And this
Right.
poor, 29-year-old guy is looking at me like, "What?"
Oh, no.
Anyway, but,
Yes.
then I went back to the library after because I only had one fallopian tube that was occluded, blocked, so there was no way to become pregnant. And in a medical journal, I found a doctor doing something brand new called laser surgery. Well, this was 1980, and we had to fly to Hartford, Connecticut from our home in Colorado. And my husband said to the doctor, "Laser surgery, the only lasers I've heard about are in that new movie, Star Wars." Truly. This was
Wow.
only 41 years ago, and it seems like the dark ages, which I guess it was the dark ages of innovative medical treatment.
But the doctor you saw in Connecticut was the one that was doing this advanced
Yeah,
technology with lasers?
he was the only one in the
Okay.
world doing it. He
Okay.
is now known as the father of laser surgery, and the doctor I saw in Vancouver is known as the father of microsurgery. So I
Okay.
was among the very first patients of the most innovative physicians in the world. So
That's amazing.
doing my own research worked. And then you asked about did I know about the other babies? Well, I did when Louise Brown was born in 1978 in
Mhm.
Oldham, England. I wasn't
Right.
even married. And we didn't
Okay.
know that we were thrilled when we heard this miracle baby had been born. But it never occurred to us that there would be a second IVF baby. It just seemed, just like some amazing scientific breakthrough that
Right.
wouldn't continue.
Right.
Well, then I heard about Elizabeth Carr being born, and right then I thought, "I will have a baby. If one
Oh, good.
child has been born in this country, I will have one myself."
Oh, I just got goosebumps.
Oh, it was so exciting, and we didn't know well, yes, when she was born, she was at Eastern Virginia Medical School,
Right.
and I immediately sat down and typed a
And how
letter.
did you hear about that anyway? Where
It was
was
all
it?
over
'Cause
the news. It was all over the
okay,
news
so
that this
you saw it
baby
on
had
the
been
news.
born.
Okay.
And then I grabbed my paper and wrote down where she had been born. And then I had to, go to the library and get telephone books. I mean, really, I'm not that old, but it seems like it. Go through and try to find the address of Eastern Virginia Medical School. So I did, and I typed my letter. Again, no internet. I had to
Right.
do it all myself. I did type a letter and mail it to the Dr. Jones, and I still have the letter that they wrote back to me and said, "Thank you so much, and we'd love to have you in our program, but we have 3,000 other letters, and
Wow.
the waiting you have to be under 35, and the waiting period looks like it'll be 5 years," and I would have been over
Wow.
35. But
Wow.
then but then one day, I was a kindergarten teacher. I got a message saying, "Dr. Smith," who was my gynecologist, "wants you to call him after work." So I called him, and his nurse said, "Dr. Smith would like you to come in today." And I went, "All right," thinking, "Well, I don't know why on earth. Everything is perfectly fine with me, except I can't get pregnant." So I went to his office and I walked in, and he was sitting there beaming, and in front of him was a big manila envelope, inside of which were all of my medical records. And I had already had 7 major surgeries by this time. And
Wow.
he said, "The second IVF program in the United States was just approved to operate experimentally at the University of Texas in Houston." And he said, "I've already called the doctor, Dr. Martin Quigley, and I told him he had to get you into his program. And he said, here is all of your paperwork. All you need to do is go get your marriage license, Xerox it." So I did, and that's how I got into that very second program in the US.
Amazing. And so then what was the process like that then as far as what and let me back up. How was your family supportive of this? What were the people around you thinking as far as were like, "Yes, this is amazing. Go for it, Ellen," or were they like, is this something you should do?" I know for a lot of myself and my patients included, we always kind of want our families to be supportive of whatever we are deciding. And this being so new and not a lot of people there, what was the energy around your family and friends with you saying that you're going to do this?
You know, that's a very interesting question, and that shows the difference in 40 years between then
Mm,
and today. You talked to it about it to your friends, to your family, as do your clients. But we did not. There
yeah, that
was
makes sense.
a great stigma around the
Sure.
inability to have a baby that had existed forever since biblical times, really. It
Right.
was,
Right.
deemed as a judgment by God that you shouldn't have a
Right.
child. People didn't talk about it. The
Hmm.
only people who knew I was doing this were my husband, my mother, and my best friend. That's
Okay.
it.
And they were supportive, I assume.
Oh, very much. Yeah. So the process was, well, first of all, as soon as I was accepted, I started going back to the library, reading every article I could find about Louise Brown and Elizabeth Carr's conception. There was no information at all about the actual procedure of IVF. All I knew was that the egg and sperm were combined in a petri dish. That's it. And when I got to Houston, we went into the office and it was so different than it is today. It was so wonderful. You can't believe it. It was just the exemplar of good patient care. We walked into an empty waiting room and the receptionist looked at me and I said, Ellen and Peter Casey for Dr. Quigley. And she said, you're the new patients. Congratulations.
Oh,
So,
that's
what did
great.
that do? I physically relaxed and smiled and thought,
Yes.
this is so great. And that's the way we were treated through the entire
Like
process.
you won the lottery, it sounds like.
Yes, and that's exactly what we felt like. Exactly.
Right.
And yeah, so here knew what I was doing. And if they didn't, my friends didn't know what it even was. No one did. So Dr. Quigley had to explain to us how it worked. And at that time, it was still experimental completely. And the researchers and physicians around the world were all energetically trying every different tweak they could to make this work, not only so that the egg and sperm met and conceived an embryo, but how to grow the embryo in the proper um, petri dish environment, how
Right.
to transfer it back into the woman, how long to wait to transfer it back in, how many cells divisions were the optimal for it to work. But this was all a test. And I'll tell you a funny story. When I wrote my book, I had to I luckily got to get back in contact with all of my previous physicians because they all were going to read about themselves in my book and I them to approve it. And I called Dr. Quigley and he was so cute. And I said, Dr. Quigley, you treated me with just such warmth and kid gloves. And every day, I never knew what would happen the following day until that afternoon when you or the nurse practitioner would tell me. And I said, was that just to keep me so calm and positive? And he replied, no, we didn't know what was going to happen the next day either. That's how new this was.
Yeah, it's so exciting. I mean, to me, because it's something that I am so interested in and I love so much. That's just exciting. What an exciting time and something to be part of. I think is so cool. So, did you do a retrieval there with them, and how did that work with the medications and
Mm.
whatnot?
Well, the first step was to have exploratory laparoscopy to see if there was enough scar tissue clear, pardon me, enough of the ovary clear of scar tissue for them to be able to even attempt an egg retrieval. And that was the only time in my 5 years of conception that I really was terrified because I thought, oh my God, if there is scar tissue covering my ovaries, I will not ever be able to have a baby of our own. So that's the only time I really was upset.
And did you so for the retrieval, were you given medications before that, or was it just your natural cycle and they went in to do it during that time. So whatever you had naturally during that point was however many eggs they were going to
Yeah,
SR?
they did not do a retrieval. They
Oh,
just did the exploratory
okay.
laparoscopy the first time
Okay.
we had flown to
Okay.
Houston, and then they said, "Yes, you can do it," and so we went home, and then I started, and again, they were trying to determine what hormones to stimulate the ovaries were the best. So I started off with just Clomid, just the little pill of Clomid, which worked perfectly, and I flew back to Houston, and I stayed in a hotel by myself, and my husband stayed in Colorado because he had to work because this was expensive. And then they did the retrieval. He came down and they did the retrieval. And the first time it didn't work. And
Didn't
I
work
got
as far as they weren't
it
able
when
to
they
get any.
transferred the egg
Oh,
back
okay.
into me, the embryo,
Okay.
it didn't work. So I went back to Colorado. And again, luckily, nobody knew I was even doing this. So nobody was hounding me and saying, "Now what are you going to do now? This will never work." And I just said to my husband, "We're going back." And because I was a teacher, I had to do these retrievals during my vacations. So the first one that didn't work was August. And the second one that did work was that November, a few months later. So we went back down there, and we had 5 embryos that were all transferred back into me, and one made it, and that's my baby, Elizabeth.
Oh, what a
Isn't
beautiful name.
isn't that the best name ever?
Yes, it's funny. I still get people asking me, "Do I call you Elizabeth?" And I'm like, "Yes, that's
Yes,
what I go by."
yes.
Well, congratulations. What an amazing story. I think the next part of that is when did you come open to family and friends and or to Elizabeth of how her birth story went or her
W
conception story, I should
Yeah.
say?
When I was 3 months pregnant, I picked up the telephone and called Doctor Quigley in Houston and said, "I will speak to anyone you want me to speak to. I will speak to prospective parents, other physicians. I will speak to the press. I will speak to attorneys. I will speak to theologians. I'll speak to anyone because people needed to know what this was and that it did work." So I did that before I even had my baby. And when she was born, after having so many surgeries, 5 long years of trying to have her and find out how on earth I could find what was being done experimentally in the world. The day I had my baby, all I wanted to do was sit in the hospital room and just snuggle this little beauty, and instead, I had TV cameras in my room because it was critically important to me to let the public know what this was, that IVF did exist, that this beautiful baby was not a freak, that she didn't look like a test tube. People they didn't understand that. So the misconceptions were rampant. The fear, the vitriol was quite fierce. And I faced it head on, and I agreed to every interview I was invited to attend so that I could warmly and lovingly explain what this was. And I'll tell you, I had 2 reasons for doing that. One was because I felt it was my obligation and my obligation to let other couples know this existed in the United States and that it was successful because they didn't know. They thought anyone with missing or blocked fallopian tubes thought they were at a dead end. So I
Right.
wanted them to know now they had a chance too to have
There
their
is
own
hope.
baby. Yes,
Right.
there's hope. And secondly, I wanted the American public to understand what this was so that my little girl wouldn't be regarded as a freak, an anomaly, somebody to stare at and go, "Ooh, that baby was conceived in a test tube," which we all know she wasn't.
Right.
Yeah. So
It's interesting how that term even when I was growing up, that was still the term, a test
yeah,
tube baby. I can recall when that was shifted,
very
um,
recently,
maybe the
I don't
last
know. That's something
15, 20 years,
I'll look that
maybe.
up. Yes. When she was born, the headlines around the country read, "Colorado's first test tube baby." has
Mm.
been born. And astonished evening news anchors, who were all men, of course, at that time, also really funny to watch. They go, "Oh, in Colorado, a miracle baby has been born." So
A miracle
I
for sure.
I made it, yes, and I wanted to help publicize that. And I had some pretty incredible experiences with the press being very negative toward me.
I would imagine. I mean, first of all, you couldn't ask for a better person to be facing the press
Mhm.
and spreading word. Your energy is so amazing and infectious. So I feel super blessed that you were the forefront of communicating this out to the world. But I also can imagine that at that time, even still, religious issues were a thing. I mean, I feel like even now, when people in politics and stuff, my big thing is I think they're just not educated on what situations mean. And if they really were educated and knew what was going on, they would make different decisions based on their understanding, and they just don't understand it quite well. So did you ever feel frustrated in the fact that people would maybe writing things or coming at you in an aggressive way and thinking, "Oh, they're just not educated in this properly?"
It's always been my belief that the people who are so negative and angry and have such vitriol, it's because they don't understand. And that is based in fear, that they were afraid that this would be a brave new world of babies growing in bottles in labs. They didn't understand. So I didn't ever feel angry. I felt it was my job to explain what this was. My first national television interview was really something. It was a talk show, along the lines of the Oprah Winfrey Show and the Phil Donahue Show, and it was based in Boston. I was sitting on the stage, I was 34 and beaming because I had my precious baby. And I was on with a doctor from Brigham and a doctor from Harvard, a bioethics attorney, and me. The talk show host said, "Now, before this goes live, I'll explain. First, doctor, I'll ask you this. And second, doctor, I'll ask you that. And lawyer, I'll ask you this." And she dismissed me with a wave of her hand and said, "Oh, and Ellen, we'll show pictures of your baby and you can tell how cute she is." And I thought, okay. Well, that show went live and she leaned her face into mine and sneered, "Wouldn't you say you're playing God?"
Oh, interesting. Wow.
And I could see out of my peripheral vision, I could see the other panelists freeze because it was quite a surprise. But I knew what she was doing. She was trying to have a controversial talk show. And also, the thought ran through my head, "Oh, if you only knew what I have been through in the past 5 years trying to have this baby, you will know you can't rattle me." But I also knew who my audience was and what my mission was. So my reaction to her was, "Oh no, I'm not playing God. I thank God for the gifted scientists and physicians who enabled Peter and me to have our own precious baby." Huh, she said, turning to the audience. "You're really saying that creating life outside of the body in a test tube isn't playing God?" And she wouldn't let up. And I said, "Oh, no." I said, "It's no different than a heart bypass. It's just changing the manner through which the egg is allowed to meet the sperm and create an embryo so that we could have our own child." And she kept going, and
Wonderfully said, Ellen.
I just stayed sweet and nice. And therefore, the audience hearing this thought, "Oh, this is true. I understand what this is." And I carefully explained what in vitro was. And she kept hammering me on that. Well, really knew what it was. And then she said, "Ugh." She was very dismissive of me. And she said to one of the doctors, "All right, doctor from Harvard, you explain the process." And he looked at her and he said, "Ellen has done this perfectly. I don't need to say one more
Yay, bravo for
thing."
him.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, even still, every single day, I am. We live in a world that this is possible, and all the technology that keeps continuing to move forward in this. It's amazing, truly, that people can have their path to parenthood in so many different options than they could even 40 years ago. And what a beautiful place that we have the option. It's it amazes me.
Yeah. Oh, it does too, and I'm so thrilled for all the various options that couples have now to have their own baby. I'm by it that we have those, and I wrote my memoir. I think that women need to know the stories of the women who went before them and opened the doors that they can now walk through, because young women today will when they read my book, they will see themselves in the heartache, in the loss, in the thwarted desire to have a baby, and it just keeps not working. They'll see it themselves. But when they start reading about what I had to go through, they won't believe it. And there are in there, I am not terribly clear about some of the things I faced, but yes, there were people in extended family who were Irish Catholic and said God didn't want Ellen to have a baby.
Yeah, I mean, even up until a few years ago, I've seen people that have said, we have to stop now because of religious beliefs. This
Oh,
we're not able to go down this road, and or clients and patients we have in South America that have very strict
oh,
religious beliefs. And of course, I don't have any judgment on anyone, but my heart does break for them because the path of where this is coming from, I feel like, is just misunderstood.
I so
And
agree.
yeah, I think if
So
everybody
agree.
could just understand it a little bit better, they would be more open to the options that are there.
Right. You
And
know, when my baby was 3, no, maybe not even 3, the Pope came out with his encyclical saying that in vitro fertilization was morally illicit. I got a phone call that day from a television station saying, a national station saying, would you please come right down to the station so we can get you on the evening news? Okay. So I went down, and it was really, I hadn't had time to think much about it. And that TV anchor, also wanting controversy, said, are you saying the Pope is wrong? And
as a matter of fact, I think I am.
I wanted to say that, that was the answer I wanted to give. But I knew
Well,
my goal was to bring people to our side. And I said, oh no, I'm saying the Pope is misguided. He has
right.
never known the love between a man and a woman wanting their own child.
Again, perfect answer, Ellen. I think we recently, last summer, I think it was, or maybe a little longer than the current Pope has said about surrogacy. And then went back on, he was on 60 Minutes, I think, after he had made this statement about surrogacy not being, you know, widely accepted from the Catholic Church, which again affects many, many people worldwide. They follow the doctrine of him. And he backpedaled a bit on 60 Minutes and I think recovered himself a little bit to say that, it's a case by case basis. And I do think in ways with surrogacy specifically, I think because Hollywood had made it, I don't want to get fat, so I'm going to have a surrogate type of thing. And a lot of people misunderstand even that surrogacy is not just because, they don't want to carry a baby or they're afraid of childbirth. You do have to have a medical reason in order to have a surrogate. You can't just randomly say, this is what I'm going to do. And I do think in his statement in those ways as well that he just didn't understand the concepts of what is played out in the media of anybody can sign up to do this versus the reality of there's many, many people that are not able to carry their own baby because of medical reasons. And thank goodness we have surrogacy as an option for people to do that, that are able to do that. And I hope that it will become even more normalized with the financial aspect of people to have it covered by insurance and whatnot, because that also is a situation where it's just astronomical for the cost to have a surrogate. And it's a shame that's the way it is now. But
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
I completely agree. I completely agree. Yeah. In fact, when I covered every base in our journey to have a baby, my husband and I heard about the very first surrogate parenting associates in Louisville, Kentucky. And on our way, we were heading south for a trip. On our way, we stopped and went to their first meeting where the very first surrogate was still pregnant. She was there. as was the couple who had paid her. But in those days, surrogacy was different than it is today. In those days, the egg was the surrogates,
Oh,
the mother. So now
mhm.
that has even it just expanded in the possibilities for, and no one does this because they want to. No one would go through surgery to have a child or have to have a surrogate where that baby isn't with you. You wouldn't do that unless you had to. That's why I loved when the ASRM and Resolve let many of us be advocates this past year and talk to our senators and all of our legislators and explain to them why the right to IVF bill is so important.
Right. And you bring up a good point. As much as we have all sent in our stories into Resolve and whatnot, that journey is not ended. We still need to continue to push so that there's regulations in all the states in our country of the United States and make sure that they understand where and why this is coming from so that we can educate them on the importance of these situations. And it's not a political party situation. It's really just, you know, medical and people, it's a need and it's just going to continue to be a need. And we just all need to get on board and understand that everybody has a choice in what how they want to build family and respecting that in the best way possible for everybody involved.
Well, I join you in complete solidarity. Let's go speak together somewhere.
Yes, yes. And what number is your Elizabeth? Do you know which
We
what
don't. In
number she
fact,
is?
this is a year ago. I was invited to Bourne Hall, which is the home of IVF. It was started by Dr. Steptoe and Dr. Edwards, who facilitated the birth of Louise Brown. They invited me to come to her 45th birthday party, and yes, and Alistair, who is number two in the world, and I were sitting around after the big birthday party. We were sitting around that evening together, and Louise goes, "What number is Elizabeth?" And they said, "Well, I don't really know." Because remember, they didn't keep excellent records and they also didn't publicize it for various reasons. So we're not sure, but I know for sure that she's in one of the first 20 in the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how has she been with it all growing up and knowing that her mama has been so open about talking about it? Was she always happy to know that she was one of these first IVF babies, or was that ever difficult for her to
Never. Oh, no, no.
explain?
It's just been her life. I've told her since I was first holding her in my arms. And, the press called me for her first birthday party. I got a call from the Denver NBC station saying, "Ellen, this is Denver NBC. Where can we land our helicopter tomorrow?" And I said, "Pardon me?" And they said, "We're coming to her Elizabeth's birthday party." And I went, "Okay." So she's had the press at all of her birthday parties her whole life. It's just been, and it's always been normal. But when I wrote my book, and I let her read it first to make sure there wasn't anything she did not want me to put in. And when she finished it, she came in and she said, "Mom, I can't stop crying." And I said, "Oh no, why?" And she said, "I know how much you wanted me and daddy and everyone wanted me so badly and what you went through." So that was sweet. But yes, when she was 10, I had a pioneer birthday party for her. So all the little girls that came to her party all wore pioneer dresses. And the press, of course, came to that. And they did a interesting interview with her. And she said, "I know how much they wanted me." And that was the
That's
headline.
beautiful. That's awesome. And I think that's what we want for all of our babies, no matter how they come into the world, is for them to know that they are so loved and so wanted. And, unfortunately, some of us have to go through a little bit more struggle than the next. But ultimately, we're so grateful that we have the opportunity to have these beautiful little ones come in. So, thank you again for your time. Thank you for being such an amazing advocate and telling your story. I think when you talk about the biblical times and when people were not talking about things even 45 years ago, 40 years ago, that is part of what I've been really trying to change too with family structures of knowing you don't need to be ashamed about this. You don't need to feel guilt about this. Have the conversations with your mothers and grandmothers about what they went through, because so many of them have been hiding in shame about whether they couldn't have children or they had an abortion or whatever it may be. And we don't need to feel that way anymore. And I do think that part of it comes back from the kings and queens and biblical times where if you couldn't have an heir, you were sent away. Or if, and we carry that on in our DNA, so to speak, as women, as a collective, and we don't need to do that anymore. And so hearing everybody's stories to know you also feel that shame and guilt when you've gone through it, and the sadness that you're not good enough or whatever it may be. And we got to put that behind us and move forward as women collectively to know that we are okay just the way we are. And we have science now to help us to build our families in whatever way that may look.
Oh, bravo. That was beautifully said and spot on. Thank you so much for sharing that information with all the women listening.
Thanks for having this conversation. I mean, it's been so fun, and I feel like in an industry that I love so much, it's really exciting to talk about this with somebody who's been at the forefront of it for so long. It's like my own doctor, he was at the NIH, in the 70s as well doing the research, and I just love to pick his brain about it all too because it's fascinating to me. It's really fun. So,
Yeah,
again,
it is.
and
Oh,
give Elizabeth a hug from us.
I will do that. Thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed this.
Yes. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Friends with Fertility. We hope that you found the stories, insights, and tips as inspiring and informative as we did. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Your friends with fertility are here for you. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media for updates and more fertility resources. Until next time, stay hopeful and keep believing in your journey, and know that we are sending you lots of love.